Something's happening up here in the Keter Range that I need to talk about. And I mean really talk about, because if you're listening from anywhere near these mountains, you need to hear this. It started last Tuesday when Marcus Denvers called the station. And let me tell you, Marcus isn't the type to spook easy. Been logging these forests since before I was born. Knows every trail and creek from here to the Canadian border. But his voice was different that morning, kind of shaky, you know, like when you're trying to explain something that doesn't make a lick of sense even to yourself. His crew had been working a new section up near Copper Ridge, about 30 miles into the backcountry where the old growth really starts, and they found these tracks around their equipment, pressed deep into the mud despite the ground being pretty firm from the cold snap we've been having. Marcus said the tracks were huge, and I'm not talking regular huge like a big grizzly might leave, but something that made him and his crew of tough guys pack up their chainsaws and drive back to town without finishing the job. The way he described it, the heel to toe was maybe 18 inches. But the weird part was how they were spaced. Like whatever made them was taking these massive strides, maybe 12 feet between steps, which doesn't match up with anything that walks these woods. I drove up there myself the next day to take a look, brought my camera, and sure enough, there they were, already filling with rainwater, but still clear enough to make out. And the shape was all wrong. Too narrow for a bear, too long for anything else I could think of. While I was up there, I stopped by Carter Langston's ranch since it's on the way back, and that's when things got really interesting. If interesting is even the right word for what I saw. Carter's been raising cattle on that property for 20 years, knows predators, knows how to protect his herd, has dealt with wolves, bears, mountain lions, you name it. But what happened to his cattle last week has him thinking about selling the place and moving down to Billings with his daughter. 17 head of cattle found dead in a ravine behind his north pasture. And before you say wolves or a bear, let me paint you the picture of what we found when he took me out there. These weren't killed where we found them. That was clear right away because there wasn't enough blood on the ground for 17 animals that size. And the grass on the ravine edge was all torn up like they'd been dragged and pushed over. Carter figured they'd been carried somehow, which sounds crazy when you're talking about 1,000-pound animals. But the placement didn't make sense any other way. The way they were torn apart, it looked like multiple things had been at them. The smell out there was something else too. Not just death, but something sour and wrong that made Carter's dogs refuse to come anywhere near. And these are working dogs that have seen their share of dead livestock. I spent the next couple days driving around the area, talking to folks, and the stories kept coming. Miles Radford, he's a photographer from Missoula who comes up here every fall to shoot wildlife, told me about something that happened when he was setting up for sunrise shots near Baker's Point. He heard what he thought was a tree falling, that distinctive crack and crash, but then it kept happening, not randomly, but moving in a line through the forest canopy. Miles has been in the woods his whole life, and he said it sounded like something massive was moving through the treetops, not jumping between them, but pushing through, breaking branches that were 40, 50 feet up. When the sun came up, he went to investigate and found this trail of destruction through the canopy, branches as thick as my arm snapped clean, and hanging from some of them were clumps of fur, dark and coarse, nothing like deer or elk. He gave me a sample in a Ziploc bag, and I've been keeping it in my truck, trying to figure out what animal around here has fur that thick and wiry. It doesn't match anything in my field guides, and I've been through every book I've got from my ranger days, looking for something that makes sense. But the thing that really got everyone's attention, the reason I'm on the air tonight instead of playing the usual music and taking calls about lost dogs, is what happened to the Hoffman family. They had a little cabin up near Marrow Creek. Nice older couple with their adult son. Kept to themselves mostly, but would come into town every few weeks for supplies. When they didn't show up for their regular grocery run, Connie at the market asked me to check on them since I was heading that direction anyway, and what I found there is something I'm still trying to process. The cabin door was hanging off its hinges, not broken down but pulled outward like something inside had yanked it open with tremendous force, and the frame was splintered where the deadbolt had been. Inside, everything looked normal at first. Dinner plates on the table with food still on them, coffee in the pot that had gone moldy, TV still on but just showing static. Their truck was in the driveway with the keys in it, wallet on the dashboard, Ellen Hoffman's purse on the passenger seat with everything still inside. But the Hoffmans were gone, and the only sign of where they went was a set of tracks leading from the back door into the forest. I followed those tracks for about 100 yards before they just stopped. And I mean stopped completely, not like they went up a tree or into water, but like the people making them just vanished mid-stride. The search and rescue team came up the next day with dogs, and this is where it gets even stranger, because those dogs, trained search dogs that have found lost hikers in blizzards, absolutely refused to follow the trail. They'd get about 10 feet from where the tracks ended and just sit down, whining, pulling back on their leads like they were being asked to walk off a cliff. Dylan Mercer called me yesterday from the fire tower up on Lookout Mountain. And Dylan's not someone who calls anyone unless there's smoke on the horizon. Keeps to himself up there for months at a time watching for forest fires. But 2 nights ago, he saw something that made him break his radio silence. And when I talked to him, his voice had this quality to it, like he was still trying to convince himself he hadn't dreamed it. He was doing his usual evening scan with binoculars, checking the valleys and ridges as the sun went down, when he noticed movement in one of the high meadows, the one locals call Moonshine Flat, because bootleggers used to use it back in the day. At first, he thought it was a herd of elk moving through, which would be normal except for how fast they were going, covering ground like they were being chased. But then he realized what he was seeing wasn't elk at all, but something else. Multiple somethings, moving across that meadow in the moonlight. Some were on all fours, others seemed to be moving upright, and they were covering distance that would take a human 20 minutes in maybe 2 or 3. He watched them until they disappeared into the tree line on the far side, and he said the way they moved reminded him of footage he'd seen of wolves hunting, that same flowing coordination, except these were much, much larger. After talking to Dylan, I drove out to check some of my old hiking spots from my ranger days, places most people don't know about, deep woods areas where you might find signs of wildlife without human interference. About 3 miles up the Turner Creek Trail, I found something that made me sit down on a log and really think about what's happening out here. It was a deer carcass, but not killed in any way I've ever seen, and I've seen plenty of predator kills in my time. This deer was opened up from the inside out, bones broken and scattered in a wide circle, and the amount of force needed to do that kind of damage is beyond what any animal I know of could manage. The smell around that carcass was unlike anything, thick and musky with this underlying chemical scent, almost like ammonia but earthier, more organic. It had soaked into the ground around the kill site, and nothing was growing there, just bare dirt in a rough circle maybe 10 feet across. I took some photos, collected some soil samples in old coffee cups I had in my truck, thinking maybe someone at the university could tell me what would cause that kind of effect. But honestly, I'm not sure I want to know the answer. You might be wondering why I'm telling you all this, why I'm not just calling state wildlife or the sheriff and letting them handle it. And believe me, I've made those calls. Sheriff's department says it's wildlife issues, not their jurisdiction unless someone gets hurt. Fish and Wildlife says they need more evidence than stories and some unusual tracks. But something is happening in these mountains. Something that doesn't fit with 60 years of recorded wildlife behavior in this region. And people need to know about it, need to be prepared for whatever's coming down from the high country. I've lived here my whole life, except for those 4 years at college in Bozeman. Been hiking and hunting these woods since I was old enough to hold a rifle steady. Worked as a ranger for 8 years before the accident that made me rethink that career path. I know what belongs here and what doesn't. Know the difference between a spooked deer and one running for its life. Know what terror looks like in an animal's eyes. And lately, I've been seeing that look in everything from squirrels to cattle, that wide-eyed panic that means something fundamental has changed in the food chain around here. Tomorrow, I'm planning to drive up to the old-growth forest near the peak, see if I can find where these things, whatever they are, might be coming from. There are cave systems up there that have never been properly mapped, old volcanic tubes from when this whole range was active millions of years ago. Maybe that's where they're hiding during the day, because despite all these encounters, nobody's gotten a clear look at one in daylight, just shapes in the darkness, movement in the forest, and the aftermath of their passing. If you're listening to this from anywhere in the Keter Range area, I want you to pay attention to your animals, because they know something's wrong even if we don't fully understand what yet. Dogs that won't go outside at night, horses getting spooked in their stalls, cattle bunching up in the corners of pastures instead of spreading out to graze. These are warning signs, nature's own alert system, and we'd be fools to ignore them just because we can't explain what's causing them. You're back with Mountain After Dark on KTRR 98.3, and this is Ethan Calloway, broadcasting on what I can only describe as the worst week this town has seen since the floods of '92. If you're just tuning in, if you've been away or had your radio off for the past 7 days, then you need to sit down and listen careful to what I'm about to tell you, because things have gone from strange to dangerous faster than anyone could have predicted. And I'm not sure how much longer we're going to be able to pretend everything's under control up here. Last week I told you about the tracks, the missing Hoffmans, the cattle at Carter's Ranch, and I thought maybe we were dealing with some kind of migration pattern, maybe wolves coming down from Canada or a grizzly that got displaced from its territory. But what's happened since then has made it real clear that we're dealing with something else entirely, something that doesn't care about our understanding of how predators are supposed to behave. And the number of people who've gone missing has everybody in town looking over their shoulders and keeping their kids inside after dark. Let me start with Travis Harlow, because what happened to him and his crew has every logger from here to Kalispell refusing to work the mountain camps. Travis has been running lumber operations for 15 years. tough as they come, the kind of guy who'd work through a blizzard if there was money to be made. His crew was cutting up near the 47-mile marker on Forest Road 9, way up where the big timber grows, and they'd been hearing things at night from their camp, branches breaking, something moving just outside the light from their fires. But they figured it was just black bears getting bold before hibernation. 3 days ago, Travis didn't come home, didn't radio in, nothing. So his brother drove up to check the site yesterday morning and found something that still doesn't make sense, no matter how many times I think about it. The equipment was destroyed, and I mean destroyed, not vandalized, but torn apart like it was made of tin foil, hydraulic lines ripped out, metal bent in ways that would take incredible force. But the really impossible part was Travis's truck, a Ford F-350, good solid vehicle, found 200 feet up the mountainside, wrapped around a pine tree like it had been picked up and thrown. No tracks leading up there, no marks showing how it could have been dragged or pushed, just his truck crushed against that tree, with the driver's door missing entirely. Travis is still missing, along with 2 other guys from his crew, and the only sign of them was blood on the ground near where they'd been working. Not pools of it, but drops and smears leading off in different directions like they'd all run separate ways. Search teams went up there, but came back down real quick when they heard something big moving through the trees parallel to them, keeping pace but staying just out of sight. And these aren't people who scare easy. These are folks who know these woods better than their own backyards. Nolan Beckett owns the general store in Merrow Creek. Been there since his daddy ran it before him. And 2 nights ago, something tried to get into his store while he was doing inventory after closing. Nolan's 63 years old, has a bad hip from a logging accident years back, and he spent 14 hours trapped in that store while something circled the building, testing every door and window, throwing itself against the walls hard enough to knock cans off the shelves inside. He called me on the radio around midnight, whispering like he was afraid it would hear him through the walls, saying he could see shadows moving past the windows, but couldn't make out what was casting them. The security camera footage from outside the store is mostly useless, just darkness and blur, but there's one frame where you can see eyes reflecting the infrared, multiple sets at different heights, some close to the ground and others 7 or 8 feet up. Nolan stayed in that store until dawn, and when he finally came out, there were marks all around the building, deep gouges in the wood siding, and every trash can in the alley had been torn open and scattered, like whatever was there had been looking for food, but got frustrated when it couldn't get to him. I've been trying to document everything I can, taking photos, recording interviews, keeping track of where things are happening and when, trying to find some kind of pattern that makes sense. Yesterday I went out with Hunter Carver to check his trail cameras up on the ridge between here and Cliff Hollow, thinking maybe we'd finally get some clear pictures of whatever these things are. Half the cameras were gone, not stolen but destroyed, crushed like someone had taken a sledgehammer to them. And the trees they'd been attached to had claw marks going up 20 feet or more. The one camera that was still working had been knocked loose and was hanging by its strap, and when we checked the memory card, there were 3 pictures taken in quick succession showing something moving past, too fast and too close to the lens to make out clearly, but you could see fur and bulk and something that might have been part of a face, though not like any animal face I've ever seen. The camera itself was found 50 yards from where Hunter had mounted it, like it had been ripped off and thrown, and the lens was cracked in a spider web pattern from some kind of impact. Grant Holloway, our only veterinarian for 60 miles in any direction, has been seeing things that have him thinking about early retirement and moving somewhere flat and far from any mountains. In the past week, he's had 6 dogs brought in with identical wounds, deep punctures that don't match any bite pattern he knows, and all of them died within hours despite everything he tried to do. The wounds had some kind of toxin or bacteria in them that caused the animals' organs to shut down one by one, and Grant said he's never seen anything like it in 30 years of practice. But what really has everyone scared, what made half the families in Marrow Creek pack up and leave for relatives' houses down in the valley, was what happened at Owen Riker's place night before last. Owen runs sheep on about 40 acres just outside town, has motion sensor lights all around his property because he's had trouble with coyotes in the past. Around 9 that evening, all his lights started going off in sequence, like something was circling the property, setting them off one by one, and his sheep started making sounds he said he'd never heard before. Not just bleating, but screaming. I was actually on the air when his call came through the emergency channel. Could hear the gunshots in the background as Owen tried to protect his livestock. Then this awful silence that seemed to go on forever before Owen came back on saying they were gone, but so were all his animals. When I drove out there an hour later with a couple other folks, what we found was like something out of a nightmare, and I'm trying to find words that won't upset people, but still convey how serious this situation has become. Every single animal on that property was dead, torn apart and scattered across the fields, and the violence of it was beyond anything a normal predator would do because they didn't eat much, just killed everything they could reach. Owen was sitting on his porch when we got there, covered in something dark and sticky that smelled so bad we could barely stand to be near him, just staring at nothing and unable to speak. The barn had holes in the walls where something had punched through solid wood planks, and there were claw marks on the support beams that went deep enough to compromise the structure. The smell at Owen's place was the same as what I'd noticed at the deer carcass last week, but stronger, that ammonia-like chemical odor that burns your nose and makes your eyes water. It had soaked into the ground in places, killing the grass in patches, and even the next day when the wind was blowing, you could still smell it from the road. Whatever these things are, they're leaving more than just physical damage. They're leaving some kind of biological contamination that nothing wants to go near. Sheriff Colton Reeves has been trying to coordinate some kind of response. But what do you do against something that can destroy a logging truck, that moves too fast to track, that comes out at night in groups and disappears before dawn? He's asked for help from the state, but they're treating it like a wildlife issue, saying to just stay indoors at night and secure our livestock better, like we're dealing with a particularly aggressive bear, and not something that's fundamentally different from anything in the Wildlife Management Handbook. People are scared, and I mean really scared. Not just worried, but that deep kind of fear that changes how you think about the world. Parents aren't letting their kids wait for the school bus in the dark anymore. Nobody's walking their dogs after sunset, and Main Street is empty by 7 every evening. The grocery store sold out of ammunition yesterday, and Ted at the hardware store says he sold more plywood for boarding up windows in the past 3 days than he usually sells in a month. The pattern seems to be that they're coming down from the high country, moving through the valleys at night, getting bolder and coming closer to populated areas. 3 nights ago, they were 10 miles up the mountain. 2 nights ago, they were at Marrow Creek. Last night, there were reports of something large moving through the trees behind the elementary school here in Station Hill. They're not staying in one place, not establishing territory like a normal predator would, but spreading out and down like water, finding its way through cracks. I spent this afternoon going through old newspapers at the library, looking for anything similar in our history, and I found a few mentions that might be relevant. In 1952, there was a series of unexplained livestock deaths that lasted about a month before stopping suddenly. In 1923, several logging camps were abandoned after workers reported being stalked by something in the woods. Going back further, there are Native American stories about certain times when the mountain becomes dangerous, when things that normally stay deep underground come up to hunt. Whatever's happening now feels bigger than those historical incidents, more aggressive and widespread. Every night, there are more sightings, more encounters, more people who've seen something they can't explain. The temperature's been dropping fast this week, earlier than usual for October, and I can't help but wonder if that's connected somehow, if the cold is driving them down from wherever they normally stay, or if they're following some pattern we don't understand. I'm gonna keep broadcasting as long as I can, as long as the station has power and I have something to report. If you're in the area, please check in with your neighbors, especially folks living alone or up the mountain roads. Keep your vehicles locked, your houses secure, and for the love of everything, don't go out at night alone, not even to check on noises you hear, not even if you think it's just a raccoon in your garbage. We don't know what we're dealing with yet, but we know it's dangerous, and until help arrives or these things move on, we need to look out for each other and stay safe. This is KTRR 98.3, and you're listening to what might be one of the last broadcasts from Station Hill if things keep going the way they've been. Ethan Calloway here, coming to you from the emergency shelter at the community center, because the power's been going in and out all over town, and we've got a generator here that's still running, at least for now. If you can hear this, if you're somewhere safe with a radio, then you need to know that everything changed 3 nights ago. And I mean everything. And what we thought was a wildlife problem has become something that's got the National Guard mobilizing and families leaving everything behind just to get away from these mountains. I'm looking around this shelter right now at maybe 60 people. Some I've known my whole life. Others I'm just meeting for the first time, even though we've been neighbors for years. And every single face has that same expression, that combination of exhaustion and disbelief that comes when your understanding of the world gets turned inside out. We've got families sleeping on gym mats, kids asking why they can't go home, and nobody has good answers, because the truth is too hard to explain, especially when we don't really understand it ourselves. Let me back up to 3 days ago, to what people are calling the Cliff Hollow evacuation, though evacuation makes it sound more organized than it was. Chase Donovan's family lived about 2 miles outside Cliff Hollow in one of those nice newer houses with the big windows facing the valley, the kind of place people from the city buy when they want to get away from it all. Chase had been hearing things at night for a week, seeing shapes at the edge of his property lights, finding his trash cans knocked over and strange marks on his deck. but he figured it was just bears getting ready for winter. The night it happened, Chase's neighbor Tom heard what he described as the sound of a demolition crew going to work. Just constant crashing and breaking that went on for hours. By the time anyone could get there the next morning, the house looked like it had been systematically destroyed. Walls punched through, furniture reduced to splinters, and the family's belongings scattered across 3 acres. The search teams found evidence that the family had been in the house when it started, then moved room to room trying to stay ahead of whatever was breaking in, before finally making it to their vehicle and driving away in the middle of the night. Chase showed up at his sister's place in Spokane the next day, wouldn't talk about what happened for hours, just sat there shaking. When he finally did talk, he said there were dozens of them, different sizes, some walking on 4 legs, and others standing upright, working together like a pack but not really coordinating, just all attacking at once from different directions. He said the sound they made wasn't roaring or growling, but something else, a kind of deep rumbling that you felt more than heard, and the smell was so strong it made his kids throw up even inside the car with the windows up. Derek Maddox, who flies supply runs to the remote camps and does some aerial survey work for the Forest Service, went up 2 days ago to try to get a better picture of what we're dealing with. And what he saw has him refusing to fly anywhere near the mountains again. He took his little Cessna up around dawn, figuring he'd be safe in the air and might be able to spot where these things are coming from. Maybe find their dens or nests or whatever they're using for shelter during the day. What he saw was a mass migration, and I'm using that word deliberately because that's what it looked like. Hundreds of dark shapes moving down from the high country through the valleys like a flood of living things. Derek said they moved in surges, sometimes all together and sometimes spreading out, covering ground faster than anything that size should be able to move. Some were huge, the size of vehicles, while others were smaller, maybe the size of large dogs, all moving with this flowing motion that reminded him of how army ants swarm, except these weren't insects. They were massive, fur-covered things that shouldn't exist. His plane started having problems when he flew over them, instruments going haywire, engines stuttering and coughing like it was running out of fuel, even though his tanks were full. He had to turn back and make an emergency landing at the small airstrip near Marrow Creek, and when he checked his plane, he found the outer hull covered in some kind of residue, sticky and foul-smelling, even though he hadn't flown through any clouds or weather. Whatever these things are, they're affecting things around them in ways we don't understand, like they're giving off some kind of field or chemical that interferes with machines. The evacuation of Cliff Hollow happened that same afternoon when Sheriff Colton Reeves made the call that the town wasn't defensible with these things coming down the mountain in those numbers. They tried to organize it, get everyone into vehicles and convoy out together. But panic set in when people realized this wasn't a drill, wasn't a precaution, but a real immediate danger. The convoy made it about 5 miles down Highway 2 before they ran into trouble. And the word trouble doesn't really cover what happened out there on that stretch of road. Victor Hanley was driving one of the lead vehicles, a deputy with 15 years experience, solid guy who'd handled everything from bar fights to forest fires without losing his cool. His dash cam footage, what little of it survived, shows the road ahead suddenly filled with moving shapes, coming out of the forest on both sides, and then his camera cuts out. They found his patrol car overturned about 50 yards from the road, windows broken, interior torn apart, and Victor himself was found walking down the highway 3 hours later, unable to speak, just pointing back toward the mountains and shaking his head. The rest of the convoy scattered, people taking whatever back roads they could find, families getting separated in the chaos. Some made it through to Station Hill. Others ended up driving all night to reach towns further down the valley. The Hendricks family tried to hide in their car when it broke down, and a passing trucker found them the next morning, alive but traumatized, their car's roof partially peeled back like something had been trying to open it like a can. They said the things circled their car all night, testing it, pushing it, but never quite breaking through before dawn came and they left. That's when we started finding evidence that this isn't the first time something like this has happened here. Connor Ashford, who teaches history at the high school, remembered some research he'd done years ago about early settlement patterns in the area, how there were gaps in the record, times when whole logging camps or mining towns just stopped reporting in. He went to the library basement where they keep the really old records, stuff from the territorial days, and found journals and reports that nobody had looked at in decades. There was an entry from 1889, a mining foreman writing about his men refusing to work because something was killing their mules and destroying equipment, something that came down from the peaks when the first snows started. A missionary's letter from 1923 described native families leaving the area entirely for a month, telling him the mountain was waking up and wouldn't be safe until it went back to sleep. A Forest Service report from 1952 that was never filed properly, describing an evacuation of fire lookout stations due to aggressive wildlife of unknown type. The pattern Connor found suggested this happens every few decades, always in the fall, always starting in the high country and moving down, always ending after about a month. But the scale seems to be getting bigger each time, affecting more area, lasting a little longer. The indigenous peoples apparently knew about this, had stories and warnings passed down for generations, but when the European settlers came, that knowledge was dismissed as superstition and largely forgotten. While Connor was putting together this historical pattern, things in Station Hill were getting worse by the hour. The power station on the north side of town was damaged when a group of these things tore through the fence and destroyed several transformers, leaving half the town in the dark. The backup systems kicked in for essential services, but we all knew it was just a matter of time before those failed too. People started boarding up windows, moving into interior rooms, treating their houses like bunkers. The breaking point came yesterday morning with the school evacuation attempt. They'd kept the elementary school open, thinking it was safer to have the kids in one secure location than scattered around town. But when things started moving through town in daylight, not even waiting for dark anymore, they decided to move everyone to the shelter. 3 buses, 47 kids, a handful of teachers and parent volunteers, what should have been a 10-minute drive to the community center. The buses made it about halfway before they were surrounded on Forest Road 19, these things coming out of the woods on both sides, pressing against the windows, rocking the vehicles. The kids were screaming, the drivers were trying to radio for help, and Connor Ashford made the decision that probably saved everyone. He told his driver to floor it, to push through no matter what. And when the driver hesitated, Connor grabbed the wheel himself and forced them forward, hitting 3 of the creatures in the process. Whatever these things are made of, it's not normal flesh and bone, because when the bus hit them, they didn't just get knocked aside, they burst or dissolved somehow. covering the front of the bus in this black substance that immediately started eating through the paint and metal. The windshield wipers couldn't clear it. The driver could barely see, but Connor kept them moving until they reached the community center. The other buses followed, and somehow everyone made it. But those buses are still sitting in the parking lot, partially dissolved where that substance touched them, and nobody wants to go near them. That's where we are now. About 200 people crammed into a building meant for maybe half that, running on generator power, watching through the reinforced windows as shapes move through our town in broad daylight. They're not hunting anymore, not in the way a predator hunts. They're just spreading, exploring, testing everything they encounter. Cars are overturned, doors are torn off buildings, and anything that moves attracts their attention. Though they seem less aggressive now, more like they're establishing presence than actively attacking. You're listening to KTRR 98.3. This is Ethan Calloway, and I'm broadcasting alone from the station because there's nowhere else left to go. It's been 22 days since this started, and if you're hearing this, if you're somewhere beyond these mountains with power and safety, then you need to know what's happened here. Need to understand that Station Hill is gone. Not destroyed exactly, but abandoned. Empty except for a few of us, too stubborn or too tired to run anymore. I'm looking out the window of the broadcast booth right now at a town I don't recognize anymore. Cars flipped over and pushed into piles like toys, storefronts with their walls caved in, and those things moving through the streets without any hesitation, like they own the place now. The snow started 2 days ago, earlier than usual, and it's covering everything in white that makes the damage look almost peaceful from a distance, until you see the dark stains spreading where the snow melts around certain spots, places where people tried to make a stand and failed. Most everyone evacuated 4 days ago after what happened at the hospital. And I need to tell you about that because it shows how completely unprepared we were for something like this. Station Hill General is a small facility, 20 beds on a good day, but we turned it into a makeshift trauma center for people injured in encounters with these creatures. Dr. Tyler Callahan and his staff were doing incredible work under impossible conditions, treating wounds none of them had seen before, dealing with that toxic substance the creatures leak when injured. The hospital had reinforced doors, backup power, medical supplies, everything you'd want in a crisis. And for a while it seemed like the safest place in town. They had 38 patients and staff inside when it happened. Middle of the night, those things came through the walls, not the doors or windows, but straight through the reinforced concrete walls like they were paper. The security footage that survived shows them pouring in through the holes they made, moving through the corridors with purpose. And what happened next is why nobody stays in buildings anymore, thinking walls will protect them. Tyler Callahan tried to protect his patients, stood in a doorway with a fire axe trying to buy time for others to escape, and they found him 12 hours later when the National Guard finally arrived, or what was left of him. 6 others didn't make it out, and the ones who did were so traumatized that most haven't spoken since. The hospital is just an empty shell now, snow blowing through the holes in the walls, medical equipment scattered and broken, and that chemical smell so strong you can taste it from the street. Jason Kincaid was one of those researcher types who show up whenever something strange happens, had a bunch of degrees and expensive equipment, thought he could figure out what these things were. He set up in the old Keter mine about 8 miles up the mountain. Figured being underground would give him protection and maybe let him observe without being detected. He was broadcasting updates on the amateur radio bands, real scientific stuff about behavioral patterns and biological samples he was collecting. His last transmission was 3 days ago. Started normal enough with him describing tracks he'd found in the mine tunnels, measurements and observations, very clinical and detached. Then his voice changed, got real quiet, and he said he could hear them moving deeper in the mine, lots of them, like the whole mountain was hollow and full of these things. The transmission went on for another 3 minutes. Just him breathing heavy and occasionally whispering about sounds getting closer. Then this wet, crunching noise that went on way too long before the signal cut out. A team tried to reach the mine yesterday, but the entrance had collapsed. Whether from inside or outside, nobody could tell. And there were sounds from deep in the mountain, rhythmic pounding like something huge was moving around down there. They didn't try to dig through, just marked it on the map as another place we can't go anymore, another piece of our world that belongs to them now. Trevor Vaughn thought he could wait it out, had one of those reinforced houses people build when they're worried about forest fires, metal shutters on all the windows, fireproof siding, its own well, and generator system. He moved his whole family in there, his wife and 3 kids, enough supplies for a month. Figured he'd just hunker down until this passed like a storm. We could hear him on the radio for a while, checking in every few hours, saying they were doing okay. Kids were scared, but handling it. Then yesterday morning, his wife came on the radio, crying so hard we could barely understand her, saying they were inside the house, had been all night, just standing in the rooms, not doing anything, not attacking, just being there. Trevor had tried to make them leave, shot at them, hit them with a baseball bat, but they just stood there taking it, bleeding that black substance that was eating through their floor, filling their house with that chemical smell that made it hard to breathe. The last thing she said was that Trevor had stopped moving, was just sitting in the corner staring at them, and the kids wouldn't stop screaming. Blake Torrance, the biologist from the university who'd come up to study what was happening, he had a theory before he disappeared that these things weren't really hunting us, weren't even particularly interested in us as food. He'd examined some of the remains they left behind, did some tests on that substance they leak, and he thought they were just expanding territory, that we were just obstacles to be removed or ignored, depending on how much trouble we caused them. He said their biology didn't make sense, like they were designed for a different environment, maybe underground or deep ocean, someplace with different pressure and temperature. Blake tried to get close enough to study a live one, had this whole setup with cameras and sensors, protective gear he'd borrowed from the hazmat team. Dean Rourke and some others went with him as protection, 12 guys with hunting rifles who thought they knew what they were doing because they'd been hunting elk and bear their whole lives. They found a group of the creatures in a clearing near Vault Creek, dozens of them just milling around, not feeding or resting, just moving in these patterns that Blake said looked almost like communication, but not quite. Dean's the only one who made it back, and he wasn't in any shape to tell us what happened for hours, just sat there rocking and mumbling about how the bullets didn't stop them, just made them angry. When he finally could talk, he said they'd opened fire when one of the creatures noticed them and started moving their way, put dozens of rounds into it, could see the impacts, the black fluid spraying out, but it kept coming. Said it grabbed Mitchell Crane, just picked him up like he weighed nothing and did something to him that Dean wouldn't describe. Just shook his head and said, "We weren't meant to see things like that." My neighbor Brandon Hale tried to maintain the radio tower yesterday, said without communications we're really lost, and he was right about that, but wrong about being able to fix it. I watched from the station window as he climbed up there with his tools, moving careful and quiet, constantly checking around him. He made it about halfway up when one of them started climbing after him, and the way it moved up that metal structure, using too many limbs in ways that didn't match any climbing animal I've ever seen, made me understand we're dealing with something that doesn't follow the rules. Brandon jumped rather than let it reach him, broke both his legs in the fall, and I had to watch as 3 more of them came to investigate. They didn't attack him right away, just circled him while he dragged himself toward the station, and I wanted to help, but knew opening the door would just let them in here too. They followed him for about 50 feet, then lost interest and wandered off, leaving him to crawl the rest of the way. The weather's getting worse, temperature dropping fast, and these things seem to thrive in it, moving faster and staying active longer. During the warmer days last week, they'd slow down during the afternoon, almost like they were overheating. But now with the snow and cold, they're constant motion, always hunting or searching or whatever it is they're doing. Their tracks are everywhere in the snow, crisscrossing the town in patterns that make no sense, sometimes following our roads, and sometimes cutting straight through buildings, like they're not even there. I found Scott Easton's brother Eric dead in the supply room this morning. Don't know how long he'd been there. Must have snuck in during the night looking for food. Something had gotten him, left him partially consumed, and that smell is so strong now I can barely stand to be in the building, but where else is there to go? The generator is running on fumes, maybe another day or two of fuel left, and then this station goes dark too. One more piece of human presence erased from these mountains. Ryan Chandler made a run for it this morning in his truck. Figured if he drove fast enough, he could make it through town and out to the highway before they could stop him. I watched from the window as he gunned it down Main Street, swerving around abandoned cars and debris, actually making good distance until one of them came through a storefront and broadsided his truck. The impact flipped the vehicle 3 times, and when it stopped rolling, they swarmed it. Cole Barrett's group tried using fire 2 nights ago. Thought maybe that was the answer since nothing else was working. They had flamethrowers from the Forestry Service meant for controlled burns and set up an ambush near the old gas station. When a group of creatures came through, they lit them up, and for a moment it seemed to work, the things catching fire and stumbling around. But they didn't stop moving, just kept coming while burning, spreading that fire to everything they touched. And now 3 more buildings are just blackened shells, and Cole's group is gone. Whether burned or taken or just fled, nobody knows. If someone finds these broadcasts later, if anyone comes looking for answers about what happened to Station Hill and the other towns along the Keter Range, this is what you need to know. The town is empty now, has been for 3 days. Just me and the wind and those things that own these mountains now. I can see them from the window, dozens of them moving through the streets in the pre-dawn darkness. But something's different today. Something's changing. They're not searching anymore, not hunting or destroying, They're gathering, forming groups, and moving with purpose up toward the peaks, like they're being called back to wherever they came from. Yesterday I found Jared Monroe's notebook in what was left of the library, and he'd been putting pieces together that nobody else had time to figure out. Jared was a geology professor, retired, spent his whole career studying these mountains, and he'd found patterns in the geological record, evidence of periodic disturbances going back thousands of years, layer after layer of sediment showing normal accumulation, then chaos, then normal again, regular as clockwork every 70 to 80 years. He'd also been talking to people on the reservation, the few elders who still remembered the old stories, and they told him this has always been the way of these mountains. Their ancestors called it the hungry winter, when things that sleep deep in the earth wake up and reclaim the surface for a while. They had ceremonies and warnings, knew to leave when certain signs appeared. The early elk migration, the silence of birds, the way the air smells different when they're starting to stir. We ignored all those signs, thought we were too modern and rational to believe in old stories. The military response was a complete failure. Need to document that for whoever comes next. 3 days ago, National Guard units moved in from the south, full convoy with armored vehicles and real firepower, not just hunting rifles and shotguns. Colonel Mitchell Crane, good man, local boy who knew these mountains, he led them in thinking superior firepower would make the difference. They set up a perimeter around what was left of Marrow Creek, dug in with heavy weapons, all the modern military equipment you'd want. The attack came just after sunset, and I could hear it on the radio. All those professional soldiers who'd been calm and organized suddenly screaming and calling for backup that wasn't coming. The creatures came from above and below simultaneously, some dropping from the cliffs, others bursting up through the ground right inside their perimeter. The .50 caliber guns could put holes in them, the explosives could scatter them, but they kept coming, and there were so many, waves of them pouring down from the mountains like a living avalanche. Mitchell's last transmission was him ordering full retreat, telling his men to abandon everything and run, that they couldn't fight this, couldn't stop it, could only try to survive it. Some made it out, scattered and traumatized, telling stories about creatures that walked through automatic weapon fire like it was rain, about the ground opening up and swallowing entire vehicles, about that black substance that burns through armor and flesh alike. The military hasn't come back, and I don't blame them. Cole Barrett's son Ryan was the last person I spoke to face to face 2 days ago when he came by the station looking for anyone else still alive in town. He'd been hiding in the bank vault, only coming out at dawn to look for food and water, and he looked like he'd aged 20 years in a month. He told me he'd figured out something about their behavior, that they weren't random or chaotic, but following some kind of natural imperative we don't understand, like salmon swimming upstream or birds migrating, except instead of creating life, they were clearing space, making room for something. Ryan said he'd watched them from the bank windows, seen them working on something in the town square, bringing materials from destroyed buildings and arranging them in patterns that made no sense to human eyes. Not construction exactly, more like marking or claiming, the way wolves mark territory, but on a massive scale. He thought they were preparing the area for the next time, leaving signs or signals for the next emergence, whenever that might be. I went to look after Ryan left, snuck out just before dawn when they seemed least active, and what I saw in the square still doesn't make sense. They'd arranged debris in spirals and circles, wood and metal and other things I couldn't identify, all coated in that black substance that preserves and corrodes at the same time. At the center was something that might have been organic, might have been mechanical, I couldn't tell, pulsing with a rhythm like breathing, but too regular, too precise. I didn't stay long. The smell alone made me dizzy, and I could hear them starting to move in the buildings nearby. The weather's been getting stranger as this goes on. Not just the early snow, but the way the pressure changes, making your ears pop like you're changing altitude, even standing still. The temperature swings wildly, below freezing at night, then almost warm during the day, and the snow melts and refreezes in patterns that follow where they've been, like their presence changes the ground itself. Sometimes there's this low vibration you can feel more than hear, coming from deep underground, and all the remaining animals, the few birds and squirrels that survived, go completely silent when it happens. I've been thinking about my partner Scott Easton a lot these past days, about what really happened 5 years ago when he died. We were checking on a reported bear attack up near Copper Lake, found tracks we couldn't identify, decided to follow them even though something felt wrong about the whole situation. Scott went ahead while I was radioing in our position, and I heard him scream. Found him torn apart in a clearing with no sign of what did it. Just that smell I now recognize and tracks leading nowhere. The investigation called it a bear attack, because what else could they call it? But I knew better. Quit the ranger service because I couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong in these mountains. Now I understand that Scott probably encountered an early emergence, a scout or stray, something that came up too soon or stayed too long, and we had no context for understanding what it meant. If we'd paid attention then, connected the dots, maybe we could have warned people, could have evacuated before the main emergence began. But that's wishful thinking, the kind of regret that serves no purpose now. The truth is, we wouldn't have believed it anyway, would have rationalized and explained away anything that didn't fit our understanding of the world. Even now, after everything I've seen, part of me wants to believe this is a nightmare, that I'll wake up and Station Hill will be normal again, boring and safe and full of regular problems that make sense. The sun's starting to come up now, that pale winter dawn that makes everything look washed out and unreal, and I can see them more clearly as they move up the mountain paths. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, flowing upward like a reverse avalanche, returning to whatever deep places they came from. Some are carrying things from the town, others are dragging remains of animals or other things I don't want to identify. They're not rushing, but moving steady, purposeful, like they're on a schedule we can't comprehend. I found a Forest Service map from 1952 in the station files, and someone had marked areas with red X's, places to avoid, places where the rock was wrong or the trees grew twisted. Those marks correspond exactly to where the heaviest activity has been during this emergence, where they seem to come from, and where they're returning to now. Someone back then knew, tried to leave a warning, but the knowledge got filed away and forgotten because it didn't fit with modern forest management practices. The generator just coughed, probably only minutes left now, and I need to say this clearly for whoever comes after. This will happen again, maybe in 70 years, maybe sooner, maybe later. But the mountains will wake up again, and these things will come down to clear the valleys of whatever has grown there. The signs will be the same, animals fleeing, unusual tracks, that chemical smell that burns your nose. And when those signs appear, Don't investigate, just leave. I can see the last of them passing the station now, close enough that I can make out details I wish I couldn't. They're not uniform, not like a species should be, but varied like they've been assembled from different sources or adapted to different purposes. Some have too many limbs, others too few. Some are covered in that coarse fur, while others have exposed skin that looks like leather or bark or something else entirely. The one thing they share is wrongness, a fundamental incompatibility with the world we know, like they're from somewhere else entirely, not geographically but ecologically, from conditions we can't survive and they can barely tolerate. The town is quiet now for the first time in almost a month. No screaming, no breaking glass, no sounds of destruction, just the wind and the settling of damaged buildings. The sun is fully up, and I can see the trail they've left heading up the mountain, a dark path through the snow that steams in the morning light. Whatever they leave behind, that substance that corrodes and preserves, it's changing the soil, and I wonder what will grow there, whether the forest will recover, or if those paths will remain dead zones, monuments to this emergence. My hands are shaking as I write this, not from fear anymore, but from exhaustion and probably exposure to whatever they give off. I've been breathing it for days, that chemical smell that's gotten into everything, and I can feel it affecting me, making it hard to think clearly, hard to remember what normal felt like. But I need to finish this record, need to leave something coherent for the next person who sits in this chair, warning them about what sleeps in these mountains. The generator just died, switching to battery backup, maybe 10 minutes of power left. To anyone who finds these recordings, believe them. Don't rationalize, don't explain away, don't think you're too smart or too modern for this to happen again. When the signs come, when the animals flee and the air smells wrong, take your families and leave. The mountains belong to something else, and we're just borrowing the valleys between their emergences. This is Ethan Calloway, last voice of Station Hill, signing off. If you're hearing this, remember us and remember to run when the time comes.